Hello and welcome to Plant CEO. In today's episode, I'd like to welcome my guest, Jay Karandikar, Venture Partner at New Crop Capital. Hi Jay, welcome to the show.
Hi Anand, thanks for having me.
It's great to be here with you and taking this time out. So you've just recently moved from New York to Santa Monica.
That's right, I'm loving the weather here. It's much better as we transition into the winter months.
Yeah, it's good place to be. I'm definitely missing that weather right now in the rainy day in London. So yeah. So can you tell me a little bit about your background and how you started your career in quantitative trading?
To give you an idea of how I ended up where I did end up, I'll take you back to when I was in college. So at that time, I heard about this concept called earning to give, which came from this philosophy of effective altruism. And I was really intrigued by this idea. If you haven't heard of it, it's the concept that in order to maximize the amount of good that you can do in the world, one way is to try to find a career where you can earn money and use that money for a cause that you care about. And in my case, the cause I really cared about was farm animals. So I thought, let me try out this earning to give concept. And I thought that I would go into finance. My first real exposure to finance was in Tokyo, where I worked at a fund of funds. So this was a hedge fund that invests in other hedge funds. And that was actually a really good first exposure to finance because I got to see all of the different types of hedge funds that are out there. And I got to learn how these different types of hedge funds operate. And then after that, I moved into quantitative trading at a hedge fund in Connecticut. And I did that for a while. But around that time, I started seeing all of these different products coming out, like the Impossible Burger, the Beyond Burger, the different plant-based products from Just. And that was really exciting to me because I saw the potential that it had to move the world away from animal agriculture. And that was when I realized that I could combine my career in finance with helping farm animals directly by helping these companies to get funding. And that was how I moved over to New Crop Capital.
Can you explain a bit more about that earning to give philosophy that you have?
It was inspired by a few different philosophers. So there's Peter Singer at Princeton University. There's another philosopher named William McCaskill. And the concept is really, we have such a limited time and resources in our lives, and there's so much that we could do in the world. But how do you choose among all these different options? And I think a lot of people who have the orientation of wanting to do good in the world have the idea that they want to do good directly, which I think can be a good path as well. But I think that the innovation that these philosophers had was that that may not be the only path, that you can also maybe do a lot of good by earning money and using that money effectively.
Yeah, and I'm totally with that. So it's something that I also do in my own personal profession. So, and when did you actually decide to go vegan?
So for me, this whole journey started when I was about 10 years old. At that time, I somehow stumbled across a video called Meat Meat, which was put out by PETA, and it showed the conditions inside factory farms. And that was a really transformative moment for me because that was when I realized that I had to dedicate my life to helping farm animals in one shape or another. I didn't know exactly what form that would take, but I knew that was the overarching goal that I had. But at that time, I was still only vegetarian. There was a long period of time between then and when I actually became fully vegan. And I did watch other documentaries over the years like Earthlings, but I try not to watch too many of those videos because you can definitely have an overload of that. And I also read a few other books like Eating Animals. And then finally, I fully became vegan in the summer of 2018. And in recent years, I actually became more attracted to the health motivations. I started to move more towards a whole foods plant-based diet. I was definitely more of a junk food vegan earlier on, but I started to feel the benefits of increased energy. And so that was a second motivation for me as well.
Yeah. So you can definitely be like a unhealthy vegan, right? If you have too much, you know, very salty and sugary foods, and you know, not look after yourself in that way. But yeah, when you move to a whole foods plant-based diet, then things start to change for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's important to keep in mind. Just because you're vegan, it doesn't necessarily mean you're healthy. You also have to watch what you're eating.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when we look at companies that are trying to produce goods but not have so many ingredients and less processing, and just going for natural ingredients in the foods that they're making. I think that's really important, and obviously still to get mass scale, a lot of processing does need to happen for sure. But in terms of limiting the ingredients to natural stuff, I think I'm quite excited about that.
Yeah, I think that as the plant-based food develops over time, it'll be good to have this kind of differentiation because there's some consumers where that's not a priority at all. And for them, there can be a different set of products. For some, that it really matters what's in the ingredients label, what kind of macronutrients are there. And for those customers, there can be a different set of plant-based products that caters to their needs. So that's one of the things that we really try to look at is that do we have the full spectrum of products to meet all of the different kinds of consumers?
Yeah. And so can you now tell me about New Crop Capital's approach, and especially their history with plant-based foods?
Sure. So New Crop Capital is a mission-based fund. We have the objective of helping to move the world away from animal agriculture. And we typically invest in the early stages with check sizes typically around 250 to 500,000 with the potential for more in follow-on investments. And the reason that we have our mission is really for three reasons. The first is animal welfare. I think that reason is pretty obvious. The second would be the environment, because the biggest impact would be on greenhouse gas emissions, with different estimates ranging from roughly 15% to maybe more, depending on what source you look at. But there's a whole range of other impacts on the environment, from water and air pollution, and I could just go on about that. And then also human health with the impact on various diseases like heart disease and diabetes. And I think recently, in the past few months, we've also seen another way that eating animals impacts human health with the whole pandemic that we're experiencing coming from these wet markets. And there's a whole host of other issues like in the seafood industry, there's actually documented cases of human slavery and abuses in that labor market. But to make a long story short, we believe that this is a really important issue to work on at this point in time. So then the question becomes, how do we tackle this issue? And our basic model is that there are four factors that drive food purchasing decisions, which are price, awareness, convenience, and taste. And our fundamental thesis is that if we can create products that are superior to animal-based foods on these four criteria, then consumers will switch. And so we view our role as finding those white spaces, those areas where we believe alternatives to animal-based foods can and should exist, and helping to make that happen. And in order to do so, we take a really entrepreneur-driven approach, and we try to help our portfolio companies to scale up actively.
Yeah. And on those four principles, which one would you say needs more development?
I would say probably convenience, because I think price definitely, if you're going to want to get an Impossible Whopper at Burger King, it's going to be more expensive. But I think we're going to be addressing that over time as we start to get economies of scale and start to produce more efficiently.
Right.
I think awareness is also really improving right now with it becoming more and more popular in the mainstream. And I think taste, we've gotten some really good tasting products that are starting to become closer and closer to the animal-based alternative. I would say convenience. So right now we're all traveling a lot less or not at all. But before that, if I went on a business trip and I was in an airport and I wanted to get a vegan meal, a lot of times it would not be that easy. So even though I'm dedicated to a plant-based diet and I would figure out a way around that, for a lot of people with maybe a slightly lower motivation level, it would be harder to stay vegan in that kind of situation. So I think we really need to make it as convenient as possible to stick to a plant-based diet.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. You know, when the pre-COVID was traveling quite a lot, and then you're at the airports, you're wandering from one place to the other trying to find something. But I do hope though that starts to spread, and a lot of the fast food, sandwich places now are having lots of options. Pret, for one, in London has just got their own vegetarian options and promoting the vegan range that they have. And those Starbucks in different countries have got different things going on, but we need more, right? You don't get all of those in different airports that you visit. So the convenience aspect is a strong point. So in terms of the most successful exit for New Crop, was that Beyond Meat? Because you previous to your time, I think New Crop had invested in them early on. Was that the big one for you guys that made the difference?
Yes, that's right. So Beyond Meat has definitely been our most successful exit to date because we invested early on. And then, of course, last year, Beyond Meat had the IPO. And once it was in the public markets, we were able to exit that way. And I think that IPO was really a transformative event in the plant-based food space because I think that really changed the conversation. Because I think for a lot of mainstream investors, that was a real proof point that showed that there is investor demand for these kinds of companies in the public markets, and that causes a pathway to open up for more plant-based meat companies. Because right now there's really only one major company, Beyond Meat, for investors who are looking for that kind of a company. So I think other companies will want to go public in the coming years to satisfy that investor demand. And I think it also contributed to the public awareness factor. I think a lot of people who follow the markets maybe saw Beyond Meat on Bloomberg or CNBC, and they wanted to find out what it was all about, and they went out and bought the product.
Yeah. And when you have people like Jim Cramer who changes his opinion over the years over companies like that, it does help the markets.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So in terms of, can you explain a little bit in terms of the types of companies that you invest in?
Sure. So our mandate is to invest in any alternative to an animal-based food. So that could be an alternative to meat, dairy, or eggs. And there are a few different categories of production technologies to produce those kinds of alternatives. So the first category would be plant-based. And the most common types here are soy protein-based or pea protein-based. But currently there are many different startups working on all kinds of other plant-based ingredients to use in alternative proteins. And then another category would be fermentation-based proteins. So you can have precision fermentation. What that means is that if you want to use a protein that is typically found in animals, you can take the DNA sequence that corresponds to that protein and put it into a microorganism like a bacterium or a yeast. And then that microorganism will grow the protein for you, and then you can extract it and use it in a product. That's, for example, what...
So I was just going to say that process is very different from a cell-based approach when you're using fermentation.
Yes, that's right. And actually, cell-based is not on the market currently, but the precision fermentation has been used for many decades, and that's what Impossible Foods is using in its product to produce heme. And then finally, the last category would be whole biomass fermentation. So you can use a material like mycelium that's it's kind of similar to the roots in plants, but it's in fungi. And the interesting thing about mycelium is that you can adjust the properties of the mycelium, like the texture, based on the conditions of the environment that you grow it in. And so you can fine tune the material to be appropriate for the animal-based food that you're trying to substitute.
Yeah, and obviously that using the core of like mushrooms, they grow in the dark. They have to have these special facilities in order to do that. Is that have you started to invest in that area as well already?
Yes, that's right. So one of our portfolio companies is called Atlas. So that's a company that's trying to grow mycelium to replace bacon. So it would be a mycelium-based bacon product.
Okay. Yeah, there's companies here in the UK that are doing really well at the moment on that side, the alternative bacon market. I think it's this isn't bacon is doing quite well here. So it might be good to talk about some other companies in your portfolio, actually. Some cases that you're excited to speak about the most.
Sure. So I'll give you a few other examples so you can get a flavor of the kinds of companies that we invest in. One example would be Novameet, which is an equipment company based in Barcelona. And the key problem that they're trying to solve is that many plant-based meats right now use an extruder to produce the product. And that works well for an unstructured product like a burger or a ground meat product. But it would be very difficult, for example, to produce a steak using an extruder because it doesn't have enough fine-grained control over the texture.
Structured versus unstructured, it has to have grown in a way for it to have some structure to
it. Yes, exactly. So just to give an overview of the what an extruder is, it's think of it as kind of a large cylinder, and the product goes through the cylinder, and the proteins get aligned in this process, and then it comes out of a hole of a certain diameter at the end. And the commercial extruders that you can buy currently, the diameter is just too big for, like, it'll be a whole mass coming out. But if you want to do a steak, then you want to create a certain structure of layers of fat and protein, and so that kind of equipment won't give you the kind of control that you need to do that.
So, and this company have developed specialized equipment that has a smaller output to create that, basically. That's what you're saying.
Exactly. So the prototype right now is in the form of a desktop 3D printer.
Okay, right.
And of course, with that, you have very close control over the output of what you're producing. But the problem with a 3D printer is that the rate of output is going to be much lower than an extruder.
Yeah.
So you won't be able to produce a product as efficiently. So the key innovation that Novameet is working on is getting that control over the texture while at the same time having a high rate of output so you can produce the product on a mass scale.
Yeah. And any other companies you would like to talk about or highlight?
Sure. One other one I would highlight would be Zero Egg. So this is a plant-based egg company from Israel. And the target market for this product is for baked goods. So companies that are using egg as an industrial ingredient in their cookies or cakes or whatever else they're baking. And the really differentiating factor for Zero Egg is that they are price competitive, that they're able to compete with eggs in this baking application on a cost basis.
Yeah, sounds a bit like, so I interviewed Clara Foods recently. Is similar approach to them, looking at the proteins within what makes up an egg, and yeah.
It's similar in that they're both trying to substitute eggs. The key difference is that Clara is adopting a precision fermentation approach,
Yes.
Whereas Zero Egg is a plant-based product.
I see. Right, got it. Awesome. And in general, what do you think makes your fund, especially for entrepreneurs who may be listening, different from other mission-driven funds?
I would say that what differentiates us is the extent to which we take on a hands-on approach. And we really try to get involved and figure out what we can bring to the table to help the entrepreneurs in our portfolio scale up their companies and grow. So to give a few examples of how this might play out,
Hmm.
we have a fairly extensive network within the food industry, and we try to facilitate connections to retailers, to distributors, to co-manufacturers. And that can actually be a key stumbling block for a lot of these early stage companies, finding an appropriate co-manufacturer to scale up the production, because the market for co-manufacturers is fairly opaque. There aren't really great centralized directories or yellow pages where you can find the right co-manufacturer. You need to find a good one via connections and be able to find out whether they will be a good match for you or not. Another example of how we can add value is our portfolio companies can work together with each other. So for example, if we have a frozen meal company in our portfolio, then that company can buy ingredients from a plant-based meat company in our portfolio and a plant-based cheese company. And so they can all work together as a package and be more efficient that way. And we can also connect our portfolio companies to later stage investors. And the final thing I would highlight is that because we've invested in a relatively large number of companies, we've seen a lot of the different possible scenarios play out. And so we can provide our companies with strategic advice to help them learn from what we've seen in the past. So a few different common scenarios that I've seen is that when a company goes from producing on a small scale to producing on a large scale, that can often result in the product that comes out of the large scale manufacturing process being a bit different than the product that they originally had. And so that can be a challenge of how do you scale up while preserving the quality of the original product that you had. Another common scenario that companies face is that they will land a large contract. So maybe a big retailer will agree to carry the product, but their manufacturing is not set up to produce that quantity of product. So they will often have to scramble to figure out how to meet that order. And that's a scenario where we've seen how to adapt to that situation and figure out a path forward.
Yeah, that's a huge amount of benefits, especially that you've gone through the life cycle with these companies and you've seen, how they've grown over the years to successful exits, etc. And in terms of like the sorts of companies now that are missing from your portfolio, what would you say they are, or certain regions, etc.?
Sure. There are two different categories that I would really highlight that we're actively looking at. One category would be Asia. So that would be primarily China and Southeast Asia. And the reason that we're looking at that region is that if we want to really solve the problem of global animal agriculture, we will have to solve it in that region, because that's the region that's projected to see the largest increase in animal product consumption. And you can actually see some pretty interesting graphs. For example, if you look at a graph that shows how the consumption of meat has increased in China, you will see a pretty strong correlation to the rate of diabetes in China.
Yeah,
so,
that's also referring to like the China study, right? That was the book that was written a few years back.
Yes, that's right. And I believe that book also showed a connection with cancer. As you increase meat consumption, then you have an increased rate of cancer. So that's one area that we're looking at is Asia. The second area I would say would be chicken. I think so far we've seen a lot of the most success in the plant-based food space in beef, in burgers and ground beef.
Are you looking quite a lot into the fish market, especially tuna?
Yes, so right now we're really excited by a company called Gathered Foods, which is producing a product called Good Catch, which is plant-based tuna. And I think the reason that we're excited is that if you look at the fish space, the plant-based fish space today, it feels very similar to how plant-based burgers felt about 5 years ago. I think 5 years ago, a lot of mainstream investors would have been very hesitant to invest in plant-based burgers. And the reason was that they didn't know if the consumer demand would be out there for a product like that. So I think once the initial startups and funds took the risk and put the product out there and got a lot of success in the marketplace, I think everyone started to realize that, yes, the demand is out there for plant-based burgers, which is why we've seen such an explosion in the number of plant-based burger brands. I think today what we need to do in the fish space is prove that that consumer demand is out there by putting out a good product, which is what we're doing with Gathered Foods. And I think in the coming years, we're going to see an explosion of plant-based fish products based on that consumer demand. And we're actually launching several products now. So we just recently launched a plant-based tuna melt in Veggie Grill. So if you're nearby to a Veggie Grill, I would suggest going there and trying it out. I just tried it for the first time earlier this week. And we're launching some frozen products also, some crab cakes and other kinds of seafood products. And this year, actually, the biggest development for us was building a manufacturing facility. It was really cool for me to see because I visited the site several times over the course of several months, and I got to see how it evolved from a bare lot in the ground to a fully functioning food manufacturing facility. And I think that this facility is going to really power our growth over time as we try to increase our sales and ramp up production.
And did the tuna melt when you had it? Does it taste the same, I guess, as tuna? Not that I've ever had it, being born a vegetarian, now a vegan, not consuming fish. But I guess also in terms of the properties like the oils, the omega oils, did they add that in?
Yes, that's right. I thought that the taste was great, and I think the key ingredient there is algae oil, which helps give it some of that fishiness, and it also adds in some omega-3s, so it has similar nutritional properties to fish. But I think chicken is going to be one of the really big growth areas for plant-based meat in the coming years, and I think there are several companies that have some really good products that are emerging now, so that's definitely a category that we're keeping an eye on.
Yeah, perfect. And finally, so for those companies or those regions, what advice would you give to those entrepreneurs who are developing products and in this way right now?
Sure. So there are a few different things I would say. The first is that if you're starting up a transformative company, almost by definition is going to be something that's not obvious to others and doesn't make sense to others. Because if it were obvious, probably someone would have done it already. So I would say that one of the key attributes of successful entrepreneurs is perseverance and persistence, and knowing that just because a lot of people are saying it doesn't make sense doesn't necessarily mean it won't work. And another thing that I've seen in a lot of really successful founders and CEOs is how they react to feedback. I think that you can really go to one of two extremes. On the one hand, you can not take feedback into account at all and only believe in your original convictions. But that's not optimal because then you're not taking into account what new information you're receiving. On the other hand, you can also be too receptive to feedback and not have enough conviction in your beliefs. And the problem there is that then you'll change course too often. You'll be like a leaf blowing in the wind. But I think the most successful entrepreneurs I've seen have been somewhere in the middle. And then I would also say that in addition to having a good concept for your startup, you should also think about what you are uniquely suited for, because I think each of us has something that is in us that we have to offer in the world. And it's really up to us to identify what that is. And then the final piece of advice I would give is that timing is really key. I think the world of startups is really littered with really great ideas that were too early for their time. And so it's really a skill to be able to look at consumer trends, look at what's going on in the world, and identify, is this the right time for the idea that I have?
That's great advice. Yeah, it's really good advice, actually. So yeah, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and speaking with me today. And yeah, I wish you the best of luck and everyone at New Crop, and doing some really great work. And like the approach, especially when you're looking at, you know, these markets that have the bigger impact, to invest in companies that will make a quicker change. Whether it's for the environment or for the welfare of the animals, and actually health being a contributing factor. So yeah, I want to thank you for everything that you're doing there, and wish you the best of luck.
Thanks, Anand. Take care, and best of luck to you as well.
Thank you. See you soon. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.